A renowned black pediatric surgeon, Dr. Alistair Hayes, was racing against time, a critically injured child's life hanging in the balance. Pulled over by a racist cop, Officer Miller, for speeding, his desperate pleas to get to the hospital were met with scorn and disbelief. The officer, blinded by prejudice, subjected him to a humiliating roadside detention. He had no idea the child whose life was ebbing away with every wasted second was his own son, and the doctor he was tormenting was the only one who could save him. Viewers, welcome. Prepare for a story that is almost unbearably ironic and deeply revealing about the catastrophic consequences of prejudice. It's about a healer obstructed, a father's unwitting self-destruction, and a life saved against unimaginable odds. If stories that explore the razor's edge between life and death and the shocking ways bias can endanger us all, grip your attention. Please subscribe and join our community. Your support is vital. Thank you for being here for this intense journey. Dr. Alistair Hayes was a name whispered with reverence in the hushed, anxious corridors of Mercy Children's Hospital. At 45, he was not just a pediatric neurosurgeon, he was a miracle worker, a man whose gifted hands and preternatural calm had snatched countless children back from the brink of irreversible neurological damage or death. His specialty was trauma, the most severe, complex cases that other surgeons often deemed hopeless. He moved through the high-stakes world of pediatric neurosurgery with a quiet intensity, his focus absolute, his compassion for his tiny patients and their terrified families boundless. Dr. Hayes was a black man in a field still predominantly white, especially at its highest echelons. He had navigated the subtle and not-so-subtle biases of the medical establishment with a grace and determination that mirrored his surgical skill, earning his place through sheer brilliance, relentless dedication, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. His colleagues revered him. The families whose children he'd saved adored him with a fierce, protective loyalty. His hidden power was not just his extraordinary surgical talent, but the almost sacred authority he commanded in the operating room, an authority born from years of making life-and-death decisions with unerring precision. It was the profound respect he had earned from his peers and the deep well of gratitude from a community that had witnessed his life-saving interventions time and again. And in this specific, tragic instance, it would be the devastating irony that the life he was racing to save belonged to the child of the very man who sought to obstruct him. Officer Mark Miller was a patrolman in the suburban precinct of Oakhaven, a man whose worldview was shaped by a rigid adherence to what he considered order and a deep-seated, often unacknowledged racial bias. Miller wasn't overtly a monster in his daily interactions. He could be polite, even jovial, with those he deemed respectable, which usually meant white and deferential. However, encounters with black men, especially those who didn't immediately display what he considered sufficient subservience, often brought out a different side of him, a suspicious, accusatory, and subtly aggressive demeanor. He prided himself on his instincts, which were, in reality, just his prejudices dressed up as street smarts. He had a young son, 8-year-old Leo, whom he adored, the center of his world, a child whose bright future Officer Miller would have done anything to protect, or so he believed. It was a crisp Saturday afternoon. Dr. Hayes had just finished a grueling 8-hour surgery on a newborn with a congenital brain defect and was finally heading home, exhausted but hopeful for the child's prognosis. He was looking forward to a quiet evening with his own family. His pager, the one reserved for the most critical, life-threatening emergencies, shrieked to life with an ear-splitting urgency. A Code 1 trauma alert from Mercy Children's, an 8-year-old boy, victim of a severe hit-and-run, multiple head injuries rapidly deteriorating. The on-call neurosurgeon was caught in a freeway pileup. Dr. Hayes was the closest, the only one who could potentially save this child. Without a second thought, Dr. Hayes spun his car around, his exhaustion evaporating, replaced by a surge of adrenaline and focused urgency. He knew the statistics. With severe pediatric head trauma, every minute, every second was critical. The golden hour was a rapidly closing window. He wasn't reckless, but he drove with a controlled speed, his mind already in the ER, visualizing the scans, planning his surgical approach. He was on the bypass, the fastest route to Mercy Children's, when he saw the flashing blue and red lights in his rearview mirror. A local Oakhaven PD cruiser. His heart sank. This was a delay he, and more importantly, the critically injured child, could not afford. He pulled over immediately, his hand already reaching for his hospital ID and his emergency vehicle placard. He had no idea that the officer approaching his car was Mark Miller, and that the child whose life was ticking away was Miller's own son, Leo. Officer Mark Miller approached Dr. Alistair Hayes's car with a measured, authoritative gait, his hand resting near his holstered weapon. He had clocked Dr. Hayes's dark sedan, going at least 15 miles over the posted speed limit on the Oakhaven bypass, a stretch of road he patrolled with a zealous, almost proprietary vigilance. In Miller's mind, speeding was a clear sign of disrespect for the law, and the driver, a black man in a well-maintained but not ostentatious car, immediately fit a profile his biases were quick to construct. Probably arrogant, possibly involved in something illicit to be in such a hurry, and definitely someone who needed to be taken down a peg. "Afternoon, sir," Miller began as Dr. Hayes lowered his window, his tone deliberately neutral but carrying an undercurrent of suspicion. "License and registration, please. Do you have any idea how fast you were going back there?" Dr. Hayes, his face etched with a mixture of urgency and controlled frustration, immediately held up his hospital ID badge and a small, official-looking placard from his dashboard. "Officer, I apologize for my speed," he said, his voice calm but strained. "I am Dr. Alistair Hayes, a pediatric neurosurgeon at Mercy Children's Hospital. I've just been called in for a Code 1 trauma, an 8-year-old boy, critical head injuries. I need to get to the hospital immediately. Every second counts." Officer Miller barely glanced at the proffered ID or the placard. His eyes, narrowed and skeptical, scanned Dr. Hayes, taking in his slightly rumpled street clothes. He hadn't had time to change out of the scrubs he'd worn under a jacket during his earlier surgery. A neurosurgeon, dressed like that. The story sounded too dramatic, too convenient. Miller had heard his share of tall tales from speeders trying to evade a ticket. "A Code 1 trauma, huh?" Miller said, a smirk playing on his lips. "That's a mighty important-sounding emergency you got there, doctor. Funny how everyone I pull over on a Saturday afternoon is rushing off to save a life." He made no move to take the ID. "License and registration. Let's start with that. We'll get to your emergency later." Dr. Hayes felt a surge of disbelief, then a cold wave of dread. The officer wasn't just dismissive. He was openly contemptuous. "Officer, please," he implored, his voice rising slightly in desperation. "This is not a fabrication. You can call Mercy Children's Dispatch. They will confirm. The child has severe intracranial bleeding. He needs immediate surgical intervention, or he will die, or suffer permanent catastrophic brain damage. I am the only pediatric neurosurgeon available who can perform this specific procedure right now." Miller remained unmoved, his expression hardening. "Look, pal, I've heard it all. I need to see your license and registration, now. The more you argue, the longer this is going to take. And right now, you're looking at a hefty speeding ticket and possibly reckless driving, depending on your attitude." He tapped his ticket book meaningfully. With a feeling of utter despair, Dr. Hayes handed over his documents. The rain, which had been a light drizzle, began to fall more heavily, mirroring the bleakness settling in his heart. He watched, his hands clenched on the steering wheel, as Officer Miller sauntered back to his cruiser, the picture of unhurried, deliberate slowness. Each second that passed was a fresh stab of agony for Dr. Hayes. He imagined the chaos in the ER, the frantic efforts of the trauma team to keep the boy alive, the anxious parents somewhere, their world collapsing. And here he was, stranded on the side of a highway, his life-saving skills held hostage by one officer's arrogant, prejudiced disbelief. The minutes crawled by. 5, 10. Dr. Hayes could see Miller in his car, occasionally glancing up, then returning to his computer or his paperwork. Was he deliberately prolonging this? The thought was almost unbearable. He resisted the urge to honk, to shout, knowing it would only worsen his predicament. His pager vibrated again, a frantic summons from the hospital. He ignored it. There was nothing he could do. Finally, Officer Miller emerged from his cruiser, strolling back to Dr. Hayes's car with the same infuriating nonchalance. He held Dr. Hayes's license in one hand, a speeding ticket in the other. "All right, Dr. Hayes," Miller began, drawing out the title with a sneer. "Your license is valid, no warrants, but you were doing 80 in a 55. That's a significant violation." He held out the ticket. "Sign here." "Officer," Dr. Hayes pleaded, his voice raspy with suppressed emotion, "I will sign anything. I will pay any fine. Please just let me go. That child, his time is running out." Miller actually chuckled, a cold, mirthless sound. "You're really sticking to that story, huh? Gotta admire your persistence." He leaned down, his face close to the window. "Tell you what, I'm still not convinced. You seem a little too agitated for a big-shot surgeon, a little too shifty. Maybe I should have you step out of the car. Maybe we should have a little chat about where you're really going in such a hurry, dressed like you just rolled out of bed." The implication was clear. He suspected Dr. Hayes of something illicit, something that fit his preconceived notions of a black man speeding in a decent car. Dr. Hayes felt a despair so profound it was almost physical. This officer wasn't just incompetent, he was malicious. He was enjoying this, enjoying the power he held. "Officer Miller," Dr. Hayes said, his voice dangerously low, "you are obstructing a physician in the performance of a life-saving duty. If that child dies or suffers permanent injury because of this delay, you will be responsible, not just morally, but legally." Miller's eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me, Hayes?" Before Dr. Hayes could respond, Miller's own police radio crackled to life, the dispatcher's voice cutting through the tense silence, sharp with an urgency that made both men freeze. "All units, Oak Haven Precinct, be advised. Update on the pediatric Code 1 trauma at Mercy Children's. Victim is 8-year-old Leo Miller, son of Officer Mark Miller, badge 714. Repeat, patient is Leo Miller, son of Officer Miller. Attending physicians are urgently requesting an ETA on Dr. Alistair Hayes, pediatric neurosurgery. Child is critical. Every second is vital." The world seemed to stop. Officer Mark Miller stared at his radio, then at the driver's license still in his hand. Alistair Hayes, MD, PhD, pediatric neurosurgery. Then at the face of the black man he had been tormenting, disbelieving, humiliating for the past 20 agonizing minutes. Dr. Alistair Hayes, the only surgeon who could save his son, his Leo. The color drained from Officer Miller's face, leaving it a ghastly, doughy white. His hand, the one holding the speeding ticket, began to tremble violently. The ticket fluttered to the rain-soaked asphalt, unnoticed. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The name, Leo Miller, his son, his bright, laughing, beautiful boy, echoed in his ears, a thunderclap of horrifying, unbearable realization. The child Dr. Hayes had been desperately trying to reach, the life that was ebbing away with every precious second Miller had wasted in his arrogant, prejudiced posturing, was his own, his son. Dr. Hayes, witnessing the officer's sudden, catastrophic transformation, the dawning horror in his eyes, felt a sickening lurch in his own stomach. He didn't know Officer Miller personally, didn't know his family, but the dispatcher's words, "son of Officer Mark Miller," combined with the officer's badge number, which he'd glimpsed on his uniform, and the utter devastation now etched on Miller's face, painted an unmistakable tragic picture. The irony was so cruel, so profound, it was almost beyond comprehension. My Leo," Miller finally choked out, his voice a strangled whisper. He looked at Dr. Hayes, his eyes wide with a desperate, pleading terror that was a grotesque parody of his earlier sneering arrogance. Is it my boy, you're—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Dr. Hayes, his own exhaustion and frustration momentarily forgotten, felt a surge of professional focus, overlaid with a deep, aching empathy for the unimaginable pain this man must be feeling, a pain Miller himself had just catastrophically compounded. "Officer Miller," Dr. Hayes said, his voice gentle now, despite everything, "if Leo is the 8-year-old hit-and-run victim, then yes, he is my patient, and he needs me, now." Miller stumbled back from the car, his legs threatening to buckle. He fumbled for his radio, his hand shaking so violently he could barely key the mic. "Dispatch, this is Miller, badge 714. I have Dr. Hayes with me. Oh, God, I have Dr. Hayes here." His voice broke, a raw sob escaping his lips. The dispatcher, sensing the profound distress, replied, "Officer Miller, are you all right? What is your status with Dr. Hayes?" I stopped him," Miller confessed, the words tearing from him. I didn't believe him." "Oh, God, Leo, Dr. Hayes, please, you have to save him, please." He was no longer a police officer. He was just a terrified father, his world collapsing around him, the full weight of his disastrous misjudgment crashing down. "I will do everything in my power, officer," Dr. Hayes said, his voice regaining its calm, authoritative tone, the surgeon taking over. "But we are losing critical time. I need an escort now." Miller, galvanized by a desperate primal need to undo even a fraction of the damage he had caused, scrambled back into his cruiser. Yes, an escort. Follow me, doctor. I'll get you there. I'll clear the way." He slammed the car into gear, activated his lights and siren, no longer a tool of petty harassment but a wail of desperate hope, and tore onto the bypass, driving with a controlled fury that mirrored Dr. Hayes's own. The journey to Mercy Children's was a blur of screaming sirens, flashing lights, and a silent shared prayer between two men whose lives had just become inextricably, tragically intertwined. Dr. Hayes, his focus absolute, tailed Miller's cruiser, his mind already in the operating room, visualizing the delicate life-saving maneuvers he would need to perform. He pushed aside the anger, the frustration, the bitter irony of it all. All that mattered now was the child, Leo Miller. They screeched to a halt at the ambulance bay, where a frantic trauma team was waiting, their faces grim. As Dr. Hayes leaped from his car, grabbing his medical bag, he saw a woman, Miller's wife, he presumed, her face streaked with tears, being comforted by a chaplain. He didn't pause. He raced inside, Officer Miller stumbling out of his own cruiser, looking utterly broken, a man destroyed by his own bigotry. The hidden power in this story was not just Dr. Hayes's surgical skill, but the devastating, immutable power of truth and consequence, delivered with the cruel precision of a Greek tragedy. Officer Miller, in his blind prejudice, had sought to demean and obstruct a black man. In doing so, he had nearly signed his own son's death warrant. The reckoning for his actions was not a courtroom verdict or an internal affairs investigation, but the unbearable lifelong knowledge of what he had almost done. The only hope for his son now rested in the hands of the very man he had so callously wronged. The scene in the pediatric neurosurgery operating room at Mercy Children's was one of intense, almost unbearable concentration. Dr. Alistair Hayes, a titan of calm amidst a maelstrom of beeping monitors and urgent hushed commands, worked with a focus that was preternatural. The life of 8-year-old Leo Miller, Officer Mark Miller's son, lay quite literally in his hands. The CT scans had confirmed Dr. Hayes's worst fears: a massive epidural hematoma, a rapidly expanding bleed between the skull and the dura, the tough outer membrane covering the brain. It was compressing Leo's brain with terrifying speed, a ticking clock that Officer Miller's roadside delay had almost allowed to run out. "Scalpel," Dr. Hayes commanded, his voice low and steady, his eyes magnified by surgical loops, fixed on the small, shaved area of Leo's head. The surgical nurses, the anesthesiologist, the residents, all moved with a practiced, seamless efficiency, anticipating his every need. He made the incision swift and precise, then used a high-speed drill to create burr holes in Leo's fragile skull, relieving the crushing pressure. Dark, venous blood immediately welled up, a visible sign of the life-threatening compression. "Suction," he ordered, and as the blood was cleared, he could see the extent of the damage. The next few hours would be a delicate, intricate battle against time, against swelling, against the cascading neurological damage that threatened to steal Leo's future. Outside the OR, in a sterile, featureless waiting room, Officer Mark Miller paced like a caged animal. His uniform was rumpled, his face ashen, his eyes hollow with a torment that was almost palpable. His wife, Karen, sat huddled on a plastic chair, her body racked with silent sobs, clutching a small, worn teddy bear that Leo couldn't sleep without. Miller was a broken man. The arrogant, sneering cop who had confronted Dr. Hayes on the highway had vanished, replaced by a terrified father consumed by an unimaginable guilt. Every tick of the waiting room clock was an indictment, a reminder of the precious minutes he had squandered, the life he had so cavalierly endangered. He kept replaying the scene in his mind: Dr. Hayes's desperate pleas, his own dismissive contempt, the dawning horror when the dispatcher's words had shattered his prejudiced worldview. "My Leo, my boy," he'd murmur, his voice cracking, before lapsing back into a tormented silence. Several of Miller's fellow officers, along with precinct supervisors and even the police chief, had arrived at the hospital. The atmosphere among them was grim, subdued. News of Miller's catastrophic misjudgment, his racist obstruction of the very surgeon now fighting to save his son's life, had spread through the department like a shockwave. There was anger, yes, but also a deep, uncomfortable sense of shame, a recognition that Miller's actions, while extreme, were perhaps an indictment of a departmental culture that had for too long tolerated or ignored underlying biases. The blue wall was showing significant cracks. Hours crawled by. Each time the OR doors swished open, Miller's head would snap up, his heart lurching, only to see a nurse or an orderly on an unrelated errand. The waiting was an exquisite torture. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the OR doors opened again, and Dr. Alistair Hayes emerged. He was clearly exhausted, his surgical scrubs darkened with sweat, his mask pulled down to reveal a face etched with fatigue, but also a profound, weary relief. Miller rushed towards him, his legs unsteady. "Doctor?" My son, Leo, is he—" He couldn't bring himself to voice his deepest fear. Dr. Hayes looked at Officer Miller, his expression unreadable for a moment. There was no triumph, no accusation, only a deep, professional weariness. "The surgery was extremely challenging, Officer Miller," he began, his voice low and tired. "The hematoma was extensive and the pressure on his brain was critical. The delay did not help." He let that hang in the air for a beat, a quiet, damning statement of fact. "But," he continued, and Miller's heart leaped, "we were able to evacuate the clot, control the bleeding and relieve the pressure. He is alive. He is in critical but stable condition in the pediatric ICU. The next 24 to 48 hours will be crucial in determining the extent of any long-term neurological impact, but right now he has a fighting chance. A good chance." A strangled sob escaped Karen Miller's lips as she sagged against her husband, who looked as though he might collapse. "Oh, thank God," she whispered. "Thank you, doctor, thank you." Officer Miller just stared at Dr. Hayes, tears streaming down his face, his body trembling. You saved him," he stammered, his voice thick with an emotion so raw it was painful to witness. After what I did, you still saved my boy." He reached out a trembling hand, as if to touch Dr. Hayes's arm, then seemed to think better of it, his hand falling limply to his side. I don't know what to say. I am so sorry, Dr. Hayes, for everything. I was a fool, a blind, prejudiced fool." Dr. Hayes met Miller's gaze, his own eyes reflecting a profound exhaustion, but also a flicker of something akin to grace. "Officer Miller," he said quietly, "my only concern in that operating room was your son. My only concern now is his recovery. That is my job. That is my oath." He paused, then added, his voice taking on a slightly firmer edge. Perhaps this has been a learning experience for everyone involved." The full weight of those words, the quiet dignity, the unspoken rebuke, seemed to crush Officer Miller further. He nodded dumbly, tears still flowing. The learning experience for him would be a lifelong burden of guilt and shame. The internal affairs investigation into his conduct during the traffic stop was already underway, and given the circumstances, his career in law enforcement was almost certainly over. But in that moment, none of that mattered as much as the fact that his son was alive, thanks to the skill and compassion of the very man he had so grievously wronged. The hidden power of Dr. Hayes's Hippocratic oath, his unwavering commitment to save a life regardless of circumstance, had triumphed over Miller's hateful prejudice. The scales of justice in this instance had been balanced not in a courtroom but in an operating room, and the verdict was life. The days and weeks that followed Leo Miller's life-saving surgery were a period of slow, agonizing recovery for the child, and a period of profound, painful reckoning for his father and the Oak Haven Police Department. Leo, under the constant expert care of Dr. Alistair Hayes and the dedicated team at Mercy Children's, fought his way back from the brink. There were setbacks, moments of fear, but gradually, miraculously, he began to heal. The extent of any long-term neurological deficits remained to be seen, but his immediate survival was a testament to Dr. Hayes's skill and the resilience of youth. For Officer Mark Miller, the recovery was of a different, more soul-searing kind. He was placed on immediate administrative leave, his badge and service weapon confiscated. The internal affairs investigation was swift and brutal, Dr. Hayes provided a calm, factual statement, corroborated by dispatch logs and the GPS data from his own vehicle. Miller himself, when interviewed, offered no excuses, no fabricated justifications. He was a broken man, his testimony a halting, shame-filled confession of his prejudiced assumptions, his abuse of authority, his catastrophic failure to listen. He admitted he had profiled Dr. Hayes based on his race and attire, that he had deliberately prolonged the traffic stop out of spite and a desire to assert dominance, and that he had ignored clear evidence of a medical emergency. The Oak Haven Police Department, facing a public relations nightmare and intense scrutiny from city officials and community leaders, the story, though initially kept quiet out of respect for Leo's critical condition, had inevitably leaked and caused a firestorm of local outrage. Had no choice but to act decisively. Officer Mark Miller was terminated from the police force for gross misconduct, dereliction of duty, and violations of departmental policy so numerous they filled a lengthy report. The Oak Haven Police Union, usually quick to defend its members, offered only a token, procedural objection, recognizing the indefensibility of Miller's actions. His law enforcement career was over, his reputation in ruins. He also faced the specter of a civil lawsuit from Dr. Hayes, though Dr. Hayes, when asked, stated his only concern was Leo's full recovery and fostering positive change, not personal financial gain. The Miller incident, as it became known, forced a deep and uncomfortable period of introspection within the Oak Haven PD. The police chief, under pressure from the mayor and city council, implemented mandatory department-wide retraining in implicit bias recognition, de-escalation techniques, and protocols for handling credible claims of medical emergencies during traffic stops. The case became a stark training example of how prejudice could have fatal consequences and how an officer's primary duty to protect and serve could be catastrophically undermined by personal bias. Dr. Alistair Hayes, throughout it all, maintained his quiet dignity and unwavering professionalism. He continued to oversee Leo Miller's care, treating the boy with the same compassion and dedication he showed all his patients. He politely declined all media requests for interviews, stating only that he was grateful Leo was recovering and that he hoped lessons had been learned that would prevent such an incident from ever happening again. His actions, both in the operating room and in his dignified response to Officer Miller's abuse, earned him even greater respect within the hospital and the wider community. He became, for many, a symbol of grace under pressure, a healer who had risen above profound personal injustice to save the life of his tormentor's child. Mark Miller, no longer Officer Miller, visited his son daily. He also, once Leo was out of immediate danger, requested a private meeting with Dr. Hayes. It took place in a quiet hospital conference room. Miller, his face etched with remorse, offered a halting, deeply emotional apology, not just for the delay, but for the prejudice, the disrespect, the profound wrong he had committed. Dr. Hayes listened patiently, then accepted the apology with a quiet nod. "Mr. Miller," he said, "my hope is that you use this experience to become a better man, a better father, and perhaps in some way you can help ensure that no other officer ever makes the same mistakes you did. That would be the most meaningful atonement." The legacy of that fateful Saturday afternoon was complex and enduring. Leo Miller, after months of rehabilitation, eventually made a near full recovery, a walking, talking miracle thanks to Dr. Hayes. Mark Miller, stripped of his career and his pride, dedicated himself to his son's ongoing care and reportedly began volunteering with community groups, working to bridge divides between law enforcement and minority communities. His personal penance, a quiet, lifelong endeavor. The Oak Haven Police Department, scarred by the incident, embarked on a long, challenging path towards reform, its officers now acutely aware of the devastating consequences of unchecked bias. And Dr. Alistair Hayes continued to save children's lives, his hands guided by skill, his heart by compassion, a quiet hero whose most profound victory was not just over disease and injury, but over hate itself, by choosing to heal even when faced with the worst of humanity. The ultimate irony remained. A racist cop, in trying to assert his petty power, had almost destroyed what he loved most, only to be saved by the very man he had sought to diminish. The horrifying encounter between Dr. Alistair Hayes and Officer Mark Miller is a chilling illustration of how deeply ingrained racial bias can lead to a catastrophic abuse of power with potentially fatal consequences. Officer Miller, blinded by his prejudice against a black man driving a decent car and dressed casually, dismissed clear evidence of a life-or-death medical emergency. He chose to believe his own bigoted assumptions over the desperate pleas of a renowned surgeon, thereby callously endangering the life of a child. The fact that the child turned out to be his own son elevates this story to the realm of Greek tragedy, a devastating irony underscoring the self-destructive nature of hate. This narrative powerfully highlights the critical role of professionalism and empathy in law enforcement, and the dire consequences when these are absent. Dr. Hayes, despite facing demeaning treatment and a critical delay, maintained his composure and focus on his ultimate responsibility, saving his patient. His actions, both at the roadside and in the operating room, were a testament to his Hippocratic oath and his profound humanity. His hidden power was not just his exceptional surgical skill, but his unwavering commitment to life, even the life of his tormentor's child. The story serves as a stark reminder that every individual, regardless of their appearance or profession, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, especially by those in positions of authority. It underscores the urgent need for comprehensive ongoing training for police officers in implicit bias recognition, de-escalation, and cultural competency. It also speaks to the importance of accountability when officers betray their oath and endanger the public through prejudice or negligence. Officer Miller's termination was a necessary consequence, but the deeper lesson lies in preventing such incidents from ever occurring. Ultimately, this is a story about the triumph of healing over hate, of professionalism over prejudice. It's a narrative that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about bias within our institutions and within ourselves. It asks us to consider how often assumptions based on race or appearance lead to misjudgments, and what the potential cost of those misjudgments might be. Dr. Hayes saved Leo Miller's life, but the story also offers a glimmer of hope that perhaps through this agonizing experience, Officer Miller and the department he served might have begun a journey towards a different kind of healing, a healing of the societal wounds inflicted by prejudice and hate. If this profound story of a surgeon's dedication, a father's devastating error, and a life hanging in the balance has moved you, please engage with our channel. Like this video, subscribe for more compelling narratives that explore the complexities of human behavior and the pursuit of justice, and activate that notification bell. We invite you to share your reflections in the comments below. How can we foster greater empathy and combat bias in critical professions? Your voice is crucial to these important conversations.